through a DNA test, a cousin found me. This would have been my birth mother's sister's child, who was also put up for adoption, who also didn't receive a birth certificate. And her family had worked with the same attorney. Once I heard her story and realized that this attorney had done this to both my birth mother and her sister, that I realized that he truly was a nefarious guy and he was taking advantage of the system.
Hey everyone, it's Corey, and welcome back to Family Twist. Today's episode has just about everything we love talking about on this podcast. An illegal black market adoption, a lifetime of unanswered questions, reunion with both birth parents, the complicated reality of loving the family who raised you while trying to understand the family you never knew, and a memoir that somehow manages to capture all of it. Our guest is Patricia Knight Meyer, an adoptee, author, advocate, and member of the NAAP board. Her upcoming memoir, Wonderland, A Black Market Baby's Rise from Adoption's Rabbit Hole, tells us a story that's unlike anything we've featured on Family Twist. This is part one of our conversation, and trust me, you're going to want to stick around for part two. Here's Patricia.
Thank God for DNA, right? What it has exposed. One thing I'd love to share it on the show is that I had the opportunity one afternoon, did not know I was about to meet this man. My boss, we're on a work trip and we're driving through California, and he pulls over to this house and he's like, I need you to entertain this woman's husband while I have some business with his wife, and we're going to be downstairs, you be upstairs. And I'm sort of like, what is that about, right? But okay. So I go upstairs and there's this older gentleman who just got back from surfing, welcomes me and pours a glass of wine. And my boss at the last minute says, oh, and by the way, this guy's a Nobel Prize winning chemist named Kary Mullis, who discovered the polymerase chain reaction, aka DNA testing.
That's amazing.
I think you guys have some things to talk about. I got to spend an afternoon with Kary Mullis, and he told me all about his life studying all of this and how he came up with the idea for polymerase chain reaction. He did a lot of psychedelics at Berkeley when he was testing chemistry, and is a little controversial in his field. He was going to testify in the OJ trial. They never pulled him up for it. But I told him, I said, without your discovery, I and so many people that I know would never know for certain if the people that we had found was our family. You have changed the lives of so many people through this discovery. He was like, it never really dawned on me that it went that far. And then he signed his book. His book is called Surfing in the Minefield. It's a fantastic memoir. I just wanted to ask Kendall if you had that same feeling after your adoptive parents passed away of being like completely alone in the world. Because I did. Even though I had 6 cousins, once my adoptive parents were gone, I had a daughter too, but I still felt like I am alone in this world. And I may still have people out there. That's really what drove me, is this feeling of being, that and needing a legal birth certificate, that empty well of maybe there's still people out there who are my parents. I had to go look. Did you feel that way? Did you sense that heaviness?
I did. And it's interesting because thankfully, I knew that my adoptive parents were very supportive of the possibility that I would look. They told me, before they both died, they were, said, we know it's your birthright to know where you came from. If there's anything you can do to find your original family, then do it. And I think because I knew I had their support, my adoptive dad's second wife, Joyce, who was very good to me, was also super supportive, really drove me to, with all this parental support behind me, I just thought, you know what? Yeah, I'm going to go for it. I'm going to try to find these people. Like Corey said, you assume there's somebody out there, right? Even if found only one parent with no children, you'd still be ecstatic. 2 parents with 6 half siblings. You know what I mean? It's crazy. It's so funny because I used to always think, that maybe the reason I was given up for adoption is because my parents were super young. Well, ironically, that's exactly why. They were 15 and 16 when I was born. So neither set of grandparents was willing, I think is the nice way to say it, to entertain the idea of raising a baby. And I mean, I have bits of resentment about that, but same time, I can't imagine not knowing my adoptive parents. They were wonderful people and treated me very well. I only have love for them. So it's all good, and you can't change it anyway, accept and move on.
Yeah. And I think the whole primal wound and thing hadn't come to the surface for Kendall yet, because when Kendall was 16, he was a junior in high school. He was trying to be valedictorian. He'd already had 4 or 5 years with his stepmother and stepsister living in the house, plus had known them since birth, family friends. So it was like he still did have family. I mean, not blood relatives living in the house.
Mm-hmm.
Stayed living there till after he graduated. And then he and his girlfriend got married their freshman year of college. So I think it was like life was like happening so fast that I don't think Kendall had the bandwidth to start dwelling on, the fact that he was essentially an orphan.
And I, as soon as I turned 18, I petitioned the court, and I knew what the outcome was going to be. They said, no, you can't know. There was nothing to do back then. You couldn't sue the state.
The other frustration is, and I experienced this, even if you found someone, and I found many someones who I thought could be my birth mother, they would say, no, that's absolutely not me. That's not my sister. We're not those kind of people. And you're like, are they just lying? Do they just want you to go away? So what if I have found the person and now they're saying no, and I'm just going to be doomed to keep looking my whole life? I may have already found them. And I would literally say when I was talking to them or emailing them, if it's okay if you don't want to have a relationship, but please, if you are the right person, please tell me, because if not, I will keep looking for the rest of my life. Please tell me the truth. It was that not knowing was frustrating. And I want to apologize. My neighbor has a generator. You can't hear it? Okay, great.
Our dog was digging on the couch a few minutes ago, too. Corey's to edit that out. It's like a Havanese thing. They just love to dig when they find their little spot on the couch.
Yeah. We have 5 of the 6 dogs are in the room with us when we record, because we didn't, then you would hear them in their crates.
The scratching and the howling. I give my dog a bone to chew on while I'm in mine so that he's busy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What we've learned with this pack is that everybody wants to have the same thing. So it doesn't matter if you give all 6 dogs something to chew on, they're going to want each other's. All 5 of them are zonked out at this point.
It's funny that you bring up dogs, because I'm actually going to be on a podcast in a little bit about this woman who reached out to me and talks about having the ability for pets to heal us, to heal trauma particularly. And it made me think a lot. In my book that I wrote, I have several chapters that have dog stories in them. And I think it's because, at least when it comes to rescues, I have had such a place in my heart for animals that need homes and that have lost their mothers. And I am obsessed with this fear that my dog is going to get lost, and that he's not going to know where I went, and that he's going to feel abandoned. And so I know that I'm projecting like all of my abandonment trauma on my puppy. Mm-hmm. And I have this like obsessively, this huge fear. I always have a collar on him. I'm always making sure that he's not going to get lost, because I couldn't live with my dog out in the world and me not knowing where he was. And I know that's tied to my own adoption trauma, right? And it's very hard for me to say no to a pet that needs a home.
Well, Corey worked for the 9 years we were in San Francisco. He worked for the same company. They were a for-profit pet supply company, but he led their mission when it came to rescue connections. That's how we ended up with at least 4 of our dogs came that way.
2 of the dogs that are still with us came there, and 2 of the cats.
2 of the cats.
It's funny that you say that, Patricia, because like the nightmares that I have these days, I used to have violent horror movie crazy nightmares. So now when I have a bad dream, though, it's like I'm trying to corral dogs because like they're trying to get into a pool. I'm sure that has something to do with the family twist stuff.
I can also get on a soapbox about pet adoption. Vets today have gotten and I'm not being critical of them at all. I love what they're doing. they make you enter contracts where they ask you what the size of your home is, and do you have a backyard, and how many children are in the home with you. And if you don't come back and bring your dog for all of its vaccinations and things on a regular basis, they have right in the contract that they will come back and get your dog and you will lose custody of that dog.
Yeah.
And I parallel that with the fact that vets and places that place animals do a better job keeping track of the welfare of those animals and making sure that the home is a good fit than many of the adoptions that take place for infants today follow up. And so I can get on a soapbox about that.
Yeah.
No,
And I wrote about it on social, and then I got a lot of hate about it. People saying, do not compare adoptees to pets.
But
I'm trying to explain that it's just ironic that people think it's not a question for the welfare of the animals is always
right. Yeah.
the top priority, right?
Well, the parallels are there, regardless. Some people want to believe, but you made me think of something that I hadn't thought about in a long time, and that's the fact that my parents in the state of Arkansas, my parents had to wait nine months. They had to have custody of me for 9 months before the adoption could go through. So they got me at 2 months, and at 11 months, I became their child. And my mother meant it, and my dad did too. About after those 11, like during those 9 months, the adoption agency was involved and asked lots of questions, and there was follow-up. But man, the moment I was theirs, nothing.
Yeah.
And it's a good thing they were good parents, because I think if they hadn't been, I would have been doomed.
And so I am sort of in favor of like annual having a therapist or someone like that in charge of that adoption and annually checking in. Just see, has anyone recently in the family been arrested for drugs, or, are they in prison now? Is the family living in a car these days?
Right.
People assume that the families that adopt children are wealthy and going to be just fine, and the child's in the hands of beautiful, safe people.
Right.
But that's not always the case, and not everyone who adopts has not everybody's in control of their situation, first of all. Sometimes things happen. But also some people adopt for not so good reasons.
That's right.
Or they're adopting to try to fill holes or wounds in their own heart that they're also medicating at the same time.
True.
And then there's like, oh, guess what? A baby didn't solve my problems, and it didn't fix my marriage. Like,
right.
Things should be followed. Yeah, things should be followed up.
To your point, my dad was contacted, after my mother passed when I was 10, and my dad didn't do well after that. He was a mess. And a couple of years later, I've forgotten how it happened, but he got contacted by the Child Protective Service, whatever the organization was called. And they were questioning, 13 years I've been adopted, asking how things are going. He's like, well, my wife was sirs and died. So thanks for asking. You know what I mean? Like it seems so frivolous.
That's so interesting that they followed up after all that time. Like, that's really weird.
Yeah, it could have been haphazard. I don't know, but my dad was not impressed by that. You know what?
Yeah.
We're dealing, we got this. You know what I mean? Like, it was kind of insulting at that point, like, wow, he had been personally dealing with so much horrible stuff for years, and for somebody to ask way after the event was like, all right, you're very efficient at your job. It's like, anyway.
Did it feel like they were calling to tell him his car warranty had just gone out to re-up?
I'm good. We're dealing, and thanks for your concern.
Patricia, you did bring up something interesting that I would love to touch on before I forget about it, in that, so we haven't really had to deal with too much negativity, pushback from the adoptee community on our podcast. And I don't know if that's just because we have people on and tell their stories and we push back and we don't argue like everybody's truth is their truth. But, you're now putting yourself out there in a very public way, and your book is getting some attention already and some buzz. So have you had to deal with negativity from the adoptee community?
Not yet. And I hope never.
Good.
It's scary, though. It is really something scary. You do worry that you're going to say something wrong. My story, though, like certain parts of my story that I have put out on my social media, I had one that I put it up, and then after I got the attention of a couple people in our community that are just really, you pretty much assume that almost everything I'm not going to name names, but it's very aggressive and very angry responses from certain people, extreme people.
Yeah.
I say I was adopted, but as you know, I grew up and found out that I was never legally adopted, but I was adopted and raised by a biracial couple. And so my mother was white, but my father was Hispanic. And in addition to being tan-skinned, he also suffered from morbid obesity. And he was probably about 350 pounds when I was adopted. I think the stress of raising a paperless child, and we can talk about how all that went down in a little bit, he gained more and more. I think he gained up. At the time when I was 5, 6 years old, he was probably 400 pounds. And so I know growing up in the 70s, we suffered a lot of discrimination. He would get pulled over by the police because there was a little white girl riding in the car with him. They would question me about who this man is and do I know him? And even in standing in line in grocery stores, I would be standing right next to him and a lady would look down and say, "Honey, where are your parents?" And I'm like, right there. And so I wrote a blog post about that. And I was basically saying that in many ways, even though I'm white, I identify with a lot of the similarities of the transracial adoptees, but from a different perspective, right? I was a white child growing up and half of my family was Hispanic. So I got exposed to all the Hispanic culture. I had piñatas on my birthday. My grandmother made homemade tamales and homemade salsa and homemade tortillas. And although she suffered so much discrimination when she was a young girl, she didn't teach her children to speak Spanish. Other than the fact that my immediate family on my father's side didn't speak Spanish, the culture was still very much there. And we lived in a Hispanic neighborhood and that sort of thing. I remember one particular Thanksgiving, we were all sitting together and somebody mentioned that Hispanic people who are susceptible to diabetes will get dark lines on the back of their neck. And that's something that tells you that you could have diabetes. And then everybody gets up and starts looking at the back of each other's necks. Of course, nobody's checking mine. And I was talking and writing about things like that, about how, you go from being on the inside to suddenly being on the outside looking in. And when I wrote about being profiled in the car, people came online and said, "You are not a minority. You don't have a right to speak for us." And I'm like, but I was the child of a minority and I watched him be profiled for being Hispanic, but also for being obese. People had these assumptions that he was slovenly, dirty, not productive person in society. There was a lot of negativity around that. And I was like, okay, this is a super hot topic. I want to protect my brand. I'm happy to share the story, but obviously I can't do it here. And so I just pulled it down and walked away because I think I've learned that the worst thing that you can do in our community online is to try to debate with people who aren't open to hearing a broader message.
Right.
Yeah, that's been tough. And then I've also suffered a lot through the book and the stories in the book. The only heat I've really gotten is from a few of my adoptive family members who really didn't like the idea of the fact that I painted my raising parents as people who were unvetted and probably would have never been approved to adopt if there had been a home study. And they were put at the end of many long waiting lists, probably because my father was overweight and they were a biracial couple and it was the late 1960s.
Yep.
He also didn't make a ton of money. He was a self-employed businessman / meat inspector. That didn't sell well. And so they went around the system and hired a private attorney. I don't think they realized that they were entering any kind of illegal situation. A lot of people in the late 60s were seeking out private attorneys to do what they were calling gray market adoptions. And I think it slid into black market territory when they realized that this attorney was not delivering them the paperwork. I think that sort of like you, Kendall, I was handed over to them. They didn't sign any paperwork whatsoever. They picked me up outside of a hospital along the curb because they were told they weren't allowed to go inside. The attorney's secretary handed me over, and then they said, we'll be in touch. And then they're waiting for the papers, and they keep getting these bills from the attorney that they owe more money and owe more money. They ultimately paid him twice what they had agreed to, a sum approximately around $30K. And by the time I was a year and a half, they realized no papers were coming. And so they decided they just weren't going to have anything to do with him anymore. But they couldn't go to the police because they knew that if they went to the police, I'd be taken away. And I think that attorney knew that. And that's why he was working them the way he did. If they had been a well-funded white couple, maybe he wouldn't have tried to work the system with them the way he did. And for a long time, I wasn't sure that the story they told me about that, which I didn't learn until I was 13 years old and I needed a Social Security card, and they told me they never got my birth certificate, so they weren't sure how they were going to get me one. But ultimately, later on, through a DNA test, a cousin found me. This would have been my birth mother's sister's child, who was also put up for adoption, who also didn't receive a birth certificate. And her family had worked with the same attorney. And so once I heard her story and realized that this attorney had done this to both my birth mother and her sister, so it wasn't just one baby and one family, that I realized that he truly was like a nefarious guy, and he was taking advantage of the system. And so now I wonder how many other babies that were born in Texas in the 60s and 70s had the same sort of thing happen. I'm not sure what the benefit to this guy would have been to do this, other than that he did charge them a bunch of money, and my birth mother said she never received a dime, and that he was telling my adoptive parents that it was for her housing, it was for her food, it was for her hospital bills. He told them that she had been in the hospital for 5 days, which is pretty uncommon, right?
Right.
Mothers usually stay in for 2 days. And she said, I was in the hospital for no more than 2 days. And I was picked up in front of that hospital on January the 11th of 1970. But she swears she gave birth December the 22nd at that hospital of 69. So we don't know where I was for those 3 weeks. I may have been a sickly baby. I may have been in the hospital. Maybe that money went to pay the hospital bills. But she mentioned to me that she had, this is my birth mother, when I found her, that the friend had come to visit her the day after she gave birth, and she sent the friend to the nursery to look in on the baby, me. And the friend said, I don't know if it's a boy or a girl, but it sure has a head of dark hair. So that tells me I couldn't have been that sickly, because I probably would have been in a different unit and been in a incubator.
Right.
So I don't think that's the case either. Did I go to a different home and then something happened, so then I got moved over to this other family? Was the attorney trying to see who was going to pay him the most? I have no idea. That's the point, right?
Right.
We adoptees will never know the whole scope of our story. And oftentimes, adoptees who haven't been through the seeking and finding, they have this naive thought or fantasy that, I'm going to find my adoptive family and then all my questions are going to be answered. But the irony is oftentimes finding your people only leads to a whole new set of questions, many of which are even more disturbing than just the kind of broader questions, these vague, cloudy, broad questions we grew up with our whole life. And then we also have to mourn all of the beliefs and fantasies that we'd created about who these people were going to be and why we were relinquished. All of that comes crashing in on the reality of what really went down, right? And there's grieving for that. And then there's grieving, if it's a good reunion, there's grieving for the lost years. And if it's a bad reunion, it's grieving for the fact that now you realize you're never going to have the parent that you had hoped to have. I can get on a soapbox. You're going to have to stop me.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground already, but in many ways, part 2 is where this conversation really opens up. Patricia shares what reunion was actually like with both of her birth parents, including the remarkable relationship she built with her birth father, the inspiration behind her memoir, Wonderland, and the advocacy work that's become such an important part of her life. And then, right at the end of the conversation, something happened that neither of us saw coming. It's one of those moments that reminds you just how connected this community really is, and I have a feeling you won't see it coming either. We'll see you next week for part 2. And remember, family secrets are the ultimate plot twist. The Family Twist podcast is produced and presented by Mosaic Multimedia, LLC,